All right, welcome to my channel for this part 2 discussing Harry Turtledove's alternate history novel, How Few Remain, which is a second war between the states that takes place in 1881. I've already discussed like the intro and setup for this in part 1, so if you haven't watched that, you may want to watch that first. However, I will do a brief recap just for those that didn't watch it. So the Confederacy in this book ended up winning the war between the states, the Civil War, back in 1862. So they won the war like 3 years early. And then this is taking place 19 years after that in 1881. The South is annexing some property that they bought from Mexico, from the Empire of Mexico under Maximilian. The North, which ran under a heavy anti-Confederacy platform. The new president, James G. Blaine, learns of this annexation and declares war on the Confederate States, who then defend themselves with the aid of their allies, France and Britain. France and Britain, as a stipulation of their participation as allies of the Confederacy, which is under the presidentship of James Longstreet, one of General Lee's former generals, one of his right-hand man, essentially. Longstreet as president, is forced to, what is the word I'm looking for? He has to go along with emancipation, take steps towards emancipation of slaves that are in the Confederate States as a stipulation of European allyship. So, yeah. There's 8 point of view characters in this novel. I've already discussed them in part 1, so I'm not going to go over that again. But I thought it was pretty well done as far as the research involved in it, kind of being true to the characters, although I would say I kind of take maybe issue with the way that George Armstrong Custer is depicted in this book. It's clear to me that Turtledove's not a fan, and he kind of makes him look like an absolute moron. I found it kind of hard to believe that Custer, after he's seen how the Gatling gun's use on the battlefield, how well that they operate, that he wouldn't want to use them again. That just doesn't seem realistic to me. He's basically complaining about using these Gatling guns later in the novel, after he mowed down a whole bunch of people with them towards the beginning of the book, which I was like, yeah, it doesn't seem legit. Abraham Lincoln as a Marxist kind of seems like a stretch. I'm not sure that would actually happen. It's entertaining, but I'm not sure that I buy it. But yeah, the book, I thought it was pretty well done. It had some cameo appearances by several other historical characters, like General Grant pops up in this briefly. You have an appearance of Colonel William Tecumseh Sherman, who comes out to defend San Francisco. He never became a general in this timeline or this alternate history, because in reality, Sherman was not promoted to a brigadier general until after the Battle of Vicksburg, which was in 1863. Since the war ends in 1862, he never became general. So, yeah, I don't really have a whole lot else to add to that as far as criticisms. I guess there's 3 sex scenes in this novel. I guess I could criticize that. There's a sex scene involving Sam Clemens, a sex scene involving George Armstrong Custer as he's cheating on his wife, Libby, which I was like, ugh, really? Okay. And then there's a third one with Theodore Roosevelt towards the end of the book, where he's, I don't know, it's either a prostitute or it's just some random woman he met on the street. I'm not sure, but those scenes seemed out of place to me. Like they were kind of crass, and they kind of just came out of nowhere. They didn't last very long. You're talking about like maybe 3 pages of sexual scenes in a nearly 600-page novel. So they just kind of felt out of place. Trying to think what else. Maybe you want to know about the theaters of operation in this book. So the action's primarily divided between Utah, which has a Mormon rebellion, because once the war starts, Utah secedes and tries to form their own sovereign state, which the Union is not having it. So they send General John Pope with Custer. Colonel Custer is attached to him to go put down the Mormon rebellion. That takes up a large section of the book, but it's resolved about halfway through, I think. Then you have a section where you have like the Battle of Louisville, Kentucky, where the Union is invading Kentucky and the defense efforts going on there, which is spearheaded by one of our POV characters in the defense. It's Thomas Stonewall Jackson. So he died at the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863, but he's still alive in this timeline, and he's defending the South. You have another area of operation in the novel which focuses on Jeb Stuart's cavalry campaign down in the Southwest in New Mexico territory, so like Arizona, New Mexico, and the West Texas region, along with Sonora, Mexico. So all around in that area down there. And he ends up joining forces with Geronimo and a bunch of Apaches who assist the Confederacy in this book, although Stuart doesn't trust them. So there's some tension back and forth between Stuart and Geronimo. Like, not exactly sure that these Apaches aren't going to turn on them at some point, because I mean they're warring with the United States, and they're warring with the Mexicans. So they're basically just the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but that's not really a very stable relationship. So that's another section that takes place there. And then you've got Samuel Clemens, aka Mark Twain, in San Francisco. So yeah, we do have some character crossover where our 8 point of view characters at various times intersect with one another. Abraham Lincoln talks to Custer at one point in the book, and Custer wants to hang him, and he can't because President Blaine forbids it. There's a scene where Abraham Lincoln talks to Theodore Roosevelt up in Montana, as Roosevelt is defending Montana against an invasion of British and Canadian soldiers. You have points in the book where Alfred von Schlieffen, the German attaché to the Union Army as an observer, he talks to Frederick Douglass. There's a scene where Frederick Douglass talks to Thomas Jackson of the Confederacy. So I thought that all our POV character conversations where these characters meet and talk to each other were interesting. So yeah, I thought it was well done. One of the things I don't like about the book is that it feels unresolved by the end. You can tell this book is setting up for the 11 book, the other 10 book series that comes after it. So it leaves a lot of things kind of hanging, like the issue of emancipation is kind of left on the table. The book doesn't go into detail about how the Confederate States plan to emancipate their slaves. I know that in Guns of the South, the Harry Turtledove novel, it's another standalone. Well, that one's a standalone that does not tie into this series. That issue is tackled there, so I think maybe Turtledove didn't feel like delving back into that topic again, since he already touched on it, because it would seem redundant. In that book, he basically borrowed the model that Brazil instituted for emancipation of their slaves in the 1880s. I'm trying to think of something else. I don't know. I don't really have a whole lot to say about this book. I enjoyed it, but I'm not really sure like how in depth I want to discuss it. I mean, ultimately, the question of book reviews, I'm kind of dealing with that right now. Like, what is it that I want that I'm trying to do with these book reviews? Am I trying to convince you to read this book? Am I doing an in-depth discussion about the book? Like, how interested is the audience in me talking about this book? These are all things I'm dealing with, which is a separate issue unto itself. So I'll just say, if you're a person that is a history buff and you enjoy history and you know something about American history, especially the American Civil War, I think that you'll enjoy this novel. Um, I'm not really sure how much somebody that's not into history would get out of this, to be honest with you. They might enjoy it, but I don't know that they'll pick up on all of the little nuances or the little historical, quote unquote, Easter eggs that are hidden in here. For instance, I'll give you one of these Easter eggs. Custer's army or Custer's cavalry in this book has a couple of Gatling guns that are attached to his unit, which, if you know about the Battle of Little Bighorn, which took place in June of 1876, Custer actually had some Gatling guns attached to his cavalry, and he left them behind because they were difficult to transport and maneuver. They probably would have maybe turned the tide in his favor at that battle, but he didn't use them. So Custer having Gatling guns in this novel and then using them effectively against Confederate Confederate soldiers and against Kiowa Indians. I mean, it's kind of like a reversal of the Battle of Little Bighorn. So if you didn't know that little thing about him having Gatling guns attached to the 7th Cavalry and leaving them, I'm not sure that you would pick up on that. And there's other little Easter eggs hidden in here like that as well. You know, for instance, John Pope at one point in Utah is basically instituting military tribunals and operating as a military governor, which is something he actually did in Minnesota in 1862 when he put down the Dakota Sioux Rebellion, which he actually ends up talking to Lincoln in this book, and that is brought up. So yeah, I thought that stuff was really interesting. Very well researched, very well done, but I really don't have a whole lot else to say about it. It is a recommend for me, with the caveat that you are interested in alternative history and that you maybe know something about American history. But like I said, this one doesn't wrap up nice and tight and neat. It can function as a standalone, but there's a lot left unresolved by the end of this, and you can tell that it's setting up for future installments. Whereas Guns of the South is a complete novel. It's a standalone novel. You read it and you're done. So maybe you want to start there. Maybe you should read Guns of the South first. And if you enjoy that book, then go ahead and tackle this one. That would be my recommendation. But that's really all I got to say. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about this if you've read it. If you've read further into the series, is the rest of the series worth reading? I just like to know your thoughts on it, because I'm debating reading the rest of the books. I'll probably read the Great War trilogy just because I'm curious, but I would like to know how those later installments flush out when Harry Turtledove gets up into like the post-World War I, World War II, timeline. Like, I've heard mixed reviews on those later books. Anyways, give me your thoughts, feelings, opinions on this one below in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and have a wonderful day.